Here we have a diagram that shows the formation of one molecule of fat. Over here you have molecule P, one molecule P, 3 molecules of fatty acid, and you have one molecule of fat. For our purposes, it will be also useful to just identify what is this. So this one molecule of fat is triglyceride. And remember, triglyceride always produced by combining one glycerol molecule with 3 molecules of fatty acid. Let's move on. So here you are required to state what is P. So this we say that is glycerol. And the process is condensation. If you can't remember, you see that there is a water that is being produced after this process. So the condensation is a process that also produces water. So this would be the condensation process. Okay, so you need to explain process Q, which is the condensation process. And as I mentioned also in other videos, always state or always start with what is obvious from the diagram. So what is obvious from this diagram is you have one molecule P plus 3 molecule of this, and you get one molecule of fat. So you state exactly that. So you can say like one molecule of glycerol combines with 3 molecules of fatty acid. That will be 1 point. And then this produces a single triglyceride molecule, which is important. That's why you need to identify it. And then you can also put an extra point in, but it's still also quite obvious that this process involves the removal of 3 water molecules from here. This will be the first part. This diagram here shows the arrangement of 4 carbon atoms in the fatty acid R and S. So from this diagram itself, you would already notice something about the chemical structure. Number 1 is that, and the most obvious one here is you have at least one double bond that is present in this structure. Okay, and whenever you see that there is a double bond that is present in this structure, this would naturally means that it is an unsaturated fatty acid, because there are still additional bond that is not occupied by the hydrogen. And when you see that they are all only single bonds, this is naturally the saturated fatty acid. Okay, so here, number 1, here you are required to describe the molecular structure of fat that contains fatty acid R. Again, always state the obvious. So what is obvious here is the double bond, right? So you can say it is an unsaturated fat because it contains a double bond between the carbon atoms. And number 2, what happens when you have a double bond? What happens to the hydrogen? So number 2, it does not contain maximum number of hydrogen atoms. You see one of them is missing compared to here. Fats with fatty acid S over here, it is solid at room temperature, and you are required to explain why. First, you can always go back to the fact regarding the double bond. So you can say something like, the fatty acid S is saturated fat because it does not have a double bond between the carbon atoms. And also because it do not have this double bond, it's also having a much higher melting point. So it has a melting point that is higher than room temperature, and because of that, it is solid at room temperature. So these are the 2 points you can put in for this part. Next part, here they are talking about these people in Alaska that they eat more meat, and which contains lots of fats. However, they are not normally obese. How do you explain this? You're given 3 marks. So you must remember that people in Alaska, they live in pretty cold environment. So that definitely has something to do with the obesity that is being observed. Point number 1 would be the fats are used up to produce energy via cellular respiration. So under cold climate, they require more energy to keep the body warm. And these fats are also required to keep the body active for their daily activity. So it has to do with the energy, more energy being required. So that's the key idea behind this. So more energy is required under colder climate.